Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This is our first webinar in our PTSD and Trauma Through a Veterinary Lens series. Throughout the month of June, we will host 3 webinars, which are completely free and will be recorded for anyone who cannot attend live. In light of recent events that impacted veterinary professionals around the world, Not One More Vet, the International Association of Veterinary Social Work, MentorVet, and the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative came together to create this series to help the veterinary community establish shared language around trauma in the mental health context of the word. My name is Dr. Katie Lawler, and I am the co-founder and director of the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative. I am so honored and pleased to introduce this series and allow my colleague, Dr. Dustin Kieschnick, to begin the webinar series with Traumatic Events in Veterinary Medicine, Establishing a Shared Language. And I'll go ahead and give you his bio and then turn the presentation over to him. So Dr. Dustin Kieschnick received his doctorate from the joint program between the Stanford University Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the Pacific Graduate School of Psychology. He has trained at the Palo Alto VA Medical Center and the James J. Peters VA Medical Center in the Bronx, New York. Dr. Kieschnick's research and clinical focus is on grief and trauma. He is currently a clinical assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco. Prior to his career in clinical psychology, Dr. Kieschnick served in the United States Marine Corps for 9 years. Welcome, Dustin.
Hello. Let me pull my slides up here. Just want to make sure that everybody can see that okay. Katie, would you be able to give me a thumbs up just to make sure that everybody can see the screen? Okay. Well, hello everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is a topic that is near and dear to me, that I've spent a majority of my career really focusing on and trying to understand. And with that, there is a power in language and having a shared language for what trauma is, what it does, how it affects, that I think is really important. Being able to name something can either give it power or it can take away its power, right? And both those things can really depend on the context in which they, in which they're helpful and maybe sometimes unhelpful. I have a very ambitious agenda that I'd like to be able to get through at the time that we have here. And then I think that, this conversation though is ongoing. There's no sort of like, you have a webinar and we establish some language and then it's over. It's a continuing process, a continuing learning. And with that in mind, please reach out to me afterwards as a continued source of both support and also to a support to continue to keep learning and keep trying to understand this in a different way. We like to start just by defining trauma, just so that we're all on the same page. We all have at least a similar definition for what happens and what it actually is. And the way that I and I think a lot of other clinical professional psychological professionals tend to define it is as an event. It could be a series of events or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful, and that has potential lasting adverse effects. Now, with that, trauma events do occur on a spectrum. and they may affect people differently. So an event that one person may think is traumatic may not register quite in the same way for another person. But there's also a wide array of things of ways that it can happen to you. So, or the ways that you can experience the trauma. One is it happens to you directly. Two, that it happens to someone close to you, or you're repeatedly exposed to adverse details of events. And we think that trauma kind of becomes more traumatic when it exceeds the emotional resources and capacity that we have to cope with it. Now, when a trauma is experienced, there can be a set of common reactions in the immediate aftermath and in the days and weeks and months afterwards. Now, a lot of these can be really dependent on your proximity to the trauma. So did it happen to you? Did it happen to someone that you know about? Is it an event that has happened to people that you identify with, or or an event that brings it close to home? I think in this age of gun violence, with school shootings, with shootings in the workplace, it can register as a trauma because it can feel like, hey, that could happen to me. That's something that could realistically be there because it has happened. And then as we sort of manage things in the immediate aftermath, we can feel shock, we can feel numbness, disorientation, difficulty focusing. All of this cluster of reactions is really focused on just the inability sometimes of the brain to actually process what's happening in the moment. It's almost like the system can go into a shutdown. And then after the immediate aftermath, when in the days and weeks and months, we can start to feel fear and anxiety, anger and irritability, guilt, avoidance. And I've highlighted avoidance because this is a really, really crucial one to become aware of and to notice. The fact that, do we actually start to change our life and change what we do to avoid either thinking about what happened, to avoid being in places that remind us of what happened? It can lead to emotional numbness. You know, people can experience emotional numbness and dissociation. When a trauma happens, and we can also think about trauma in terms of a dose-response relationship, that traumatic events don't necessarily affect us in the same way every single time. But we know that the more exposure you have to them, the more risk you have with developing longer term, more chronic, and more severe and intense symptoms and reactions. Because a trauma just shatters all of our sense of safety. It makes all manner of things seem possible. Generally, we walk around in the world, and we kind of have this sense of safety. We have almost this safety bubble around us where we don't think of all the possibilities of things that could happen at walking down the street, driving to work, being on a Zoom call. And then trauma completely disrupts that. It can make us feel not safe anywhere. It can start to change our belief system. One common aspect of trauma is it can make our autonomic nervous system, our stress system, fire with more frequency and respond to more generalized stimuli. And what I mean is identifying with something that smells the same, something that, being in a place that reminds you of the place where you experienced trauma. Even just talking about it and feeling like we're reliving that moment again, simply by bringing it up, simply by talking about it. Trauma can affect us cognitively, emotionally, and biologically. If we start to look at some of the cognitive effects, so our mental process of thinking and understanding. And when a traumatic event occurs, we tend to sometimes blame ourselves. We believe that we should have been able to either stop the event from happening or acted differently in the moment. We have trouble accepting that it happened, accepting that something could happen. We try to forget that it happened, or at least some of the worst aspects of it. Now, all of these reactions are, again, often related to the proximity to the trauma or the traumatic event, right? Your proximity to it, your reaction to it in the moment can start to set the stage for how you think and how your belief system changes, how you think about it after the fact. And so trauma reactions can be so incredibly variable because they're also so incredibly individualized. Everyone experiences trauma differently, and everyone has their unique response to it. That said, we do have a way of mapping some very, very common responses to it, like blame, like this change in belief, that thinking we have a lot more control and a lot more power in the moment than we actually do. And then trying to make peace with it, trying to see like, oh, is this a thing that just happened randomly, or is it something that can happen every day? How does my mind process it? And these thoughts are often more intense and damaging if it was sudden, unexpected, and especially if there was a loss of life. It has a way of just kicking something on in our brains that makes us feel more protective. And blame, oddly enough, can be an attempt at control. Because often the nefarious nature of trauma is that it so often happens outside of our control. It's often a reminder that we have no control or very little control in the situation. And blame can sometimes have the function of making us feel more in control. Because if I can blame myself for what happened, then it makes me feel like, even though I feel horrible, and even though it continues to make me feel worse, it at least feels like something within my power. Now, when we, in order to try and accept what happens, to feel safe and normal again, we can, like I mentioned before, we can change our belief system. We begin to form generalizations about ourselves, others, and how the world works. And generally, this tends to look like others are either all safe or they're not safe at all. That the world is either safe or it's not safe at all. And if I don't feel safe around others and I don't feel safe in the world, then I have to shelter myself. Then I have to close myself off to a lot of the things that I would normally do. Okay? When we think about the context of a workplace shooting and how that can absolutely just destroy a sense of safety. It can make us feel like even just going to work is like, that's not safe. I need to stay home. I can't talk to other people because I don't know what their background is. I don't know who they are. It makes us doubt ourselves, makes us believe differently about ourselves. And typically the more severe the trauma, the more extreme and more rigid and inflexible our beliefs start to become. So some examples, that it's a matter of time before this happens to me again. I don't have control over when or if it does. Again, we're thinking about this from the standpoint of establishing a language around it. And part of establishing a language helps us to become more aware of what's happening, for one. And two, to start to understand that things that we experience do have an effect on us. And it's not something we can always just say, oh, well, just get over it. It's not really a get over it type of thing, because the body remembers, the body registers, your autonomic nervous system registers. And whether you were in the event or whether you heard about it, your system can still get activated. Our autonomic nervous system gets activated by our beliefs in the moment. It gets activated by how we're perceiving the environment. If we perceive threat, if we perceive fear, our autonomic nervous system is going to kick in. It's gonna make us aroused. It's gonna start pumping cortisol through us. Now, if we think about the emotional side of that, so we talked a little bit about the biological, we talked a little bit about what can happen cognitively. We also want to talk about what happens emotionally. So we, as psychologists, we tend to categorize emotions as two types. One is natural or primary emotions, and another is manufactured emotions, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Now, natural or primary emotions, these are the things that we would expect to feel after an event. They're the universally experienced emotions, and they're often the most vulnerable emotions. So sadness, loneliness, isolation, fear, hopelessness, even anger, confusion, and disbelief. And while the memories of this event will always evoke painful emotions, they typically start to become a little bit more bearable in time. If you think about it, it's a similar process to how grief often works, where a common way to put it is that in the early stages of grief, we're completely overcome by emotion. And then we start to feel that emotion less and less as the days go by, as we start to accept, as we start to process our grief. And often people can recover from a trauma. People can start to process what's happened and start a path to healing. And there are occasions where that path to healing can either become stuck or it can become complicated. It can often become complicated by the layering of other traumas. And they can make the picture itself much more complicated. It can make the emotions much more difficult to sort through. If you think on a primal or a basic level, one of our body's functions is to help us to escape pain, help us to escape threat, help us to escape danger. It's the whole reason the fight or flight response exists, to get us out of danger, to make sure we are able to feel some safety. And when we think about it from that perspective, like that's natural. That's a thing that happens naturally. The body is hardwired to try and protect us. And sometimes it can help protect us by helping us heal. And other times it tries to protect us by being almost overprotective. We start to develop different manufactured emotions. We start to develop responses that sort of make us feel good in the moment, but actually don't help us longer term. So it's so very important that we allow ourselves the opportunity to process the emotions, as difficult and as hard as they can be, to allow them a space to be there, to not avoid them, to not try and cover them up with something else, to not just try and stuff them away. Stuffing away emotions can be protective in the moment, and I think it can have some utility in our jobs, because we can't just be overcome with emotion in our daily jobs. it doesn't necessarily work that way for us. And so there's a good portion of us that have developed a strategy of just suppressing that emotion so that we can just function, that we're able to go on with our day to day. And while that can be a very helpful strategy to kind of get us over the hump sometimes, it's something to watch out for, because if we don't ever give a space for those emotions, it's like if something, if you think about it as suppression as something becoming pressurized, and there's only so much space for that pressure before it either bursts, it erupts, it explodes. And so, it's something, again, to really pay attention to and to be aware of, because there's only so much we can stuff away before it starts to seep out. And it can seep out in ways that feel sometimes unrelated to to the actual emotion that we've experienced. And that brings us to manufactured emotions. Right. Now, these emotions are actually not based directly on the natural response to the loss, but rather on how we personally interpret the loss. And there's a way in which it's actually a similar function to how I explained blame often works, where if we feel hurt, if we feel vulnerable, if we feel fear, sometimes we might rewire that emotion and restructure that emotion to something that feels more powerful. So if kind of the classic example is, if I feel, if I feel hurt, it can come out in anger. If I feel fear, it can come out in anger. And often I use anger a lot as an example, because the manufactured emotions often take that trajectory. Another example, like if we believe that we should have been able to save an animal, as an example, or that something is clinically wrong with us because we can't get over us, and then we will absolutely feel guilt and shame and several other unhelpful feelings that come along with it. Guilt and shame, those are often the big red flag manufactured emotions, because they tend to be disproportional to what we experienced in that moment. So again, manufactured emotions are not based on the facts surrounding the event, but rather on our recollection of it, specifically where we feel we should have been able to respond differently. And pay attention to that part, because as we start to apply this to our own lives, thinking about when we feel we should have been able to respond differently is a key thing for us to key in on. And the more we actually continue to think about things through this lens, the more our ability to understand and accept the reality of the event starts to become distorted. I like to think of a trauma as before trauma as a made puzzle. And imagine throwing that puzzle on the floor and it shattered into 1,500 pieces or more. And as we try to reconstruct the puzzle, we try to reconstruct what happened, we start to only see just a small portion of it. It tends to be fragmented. Our memory of it, our sense of it, the aspects of it that we focus on tend to be fragmented. It tends to discount the entire, like the whole picture. And by doing so, we start to create and maintain a cycle. The more manufactured feelings we continue to have, the more distressed and stuck we start to become. And that brings us to post-traumatic stress disorder. So experiencing trauma does not necessarily lead to PTSD. In the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event or traumatic events, often people will experience some semblance of these symptoms. And for a segment of the population, those symptoms will start to go away naturally. PTSD is when those symptoms start to persist. And it can be experienced in thoughts, dreams, flashbacks. It can bring forward insomnia, irritability, anger, makes it difficult to concentrate, hypervigilance, where you become always on the lookout for some danger or something that's happening. It makes you startle easier. Again, going back to that autonomic nervous system arousal and more frequent firing. You start to become startled more often because the body's starting to kick into fight or flight more often. And so it starts to also make us avoid thoughts, places, activities, and people that may remind us of the event, remind us of what we felt after the event, especially if there's guilt and shame present. Those are feelings that we often try to avoid. And that avoidance can come in many shapes and forms. It can come in substance use and alcohol, or staying as busy as possible, disengagement from activities that you love. And it can also start to result in procrastination because everything starts to feel too big for the moment, or too big for what you feel your abilities are in that moment. Now, if you hear nothing else from me over the course of this webinar, please focus on the word awareness. Because like I said, the way trauma shows up in the aftermath looks slightly different for everyone. And so your personal coping style, your personal response tendencies are maybe going to be different than somebody else. And so being able to be aware of what's happening for us, being aware of what feels like it's helpful and what feels like it's actually not helping us. One of the first steps to that is becoming aware of our personal interpretations of the traumatic event. Specifically, we need to be able to pinpoint exactly what we are telling ourselves about it. And that's because our beliefs and self-statements affect how we feel and our behavior. So, well, for example, I did something wrong. I'm a failure. That animal would be alive today, or that thing wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have been at fault. And again, we start to feel those emotions of guilt, shame, worthlessness, and may change what we do. We may stop taking certain cases. We may change specialties altogether to avoid having to be reminded of what happened. So within the field of psychology, there's a modality called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the model of it is that what we think affects how we feel, which affects how we behave. And so we tend to put it together in a triangle, because affecting any one of these points of the triangle can actually shift the cycle, because the way we think affects the way we feel, which affects the way we behave. It can become a cycle. It can become a habitual cycle as thoughts start to come in and we just accept them as fact, even though they may not be completely factual. So an example here, if we think about 3 different ways to think about one situation. So fire alarm goes off in the clinic. That's the situation. We might have the response, it's a fire, we're all in danger. And so the thing that we do is we feel fear, we feel panic. We call emergency services. We get everybody outside to safety. Scenario 2, same thing, fire alarm in the clinic. Think, oh, they must be testing the alarm. So we feel calm. We go back to everything is fine. We go back to what we're doing. Scenario 3, alarm goes off. Oh my God, the alarm must be broken. And so I feel annoyed, irritated. Like, why can't they just fix this thing? It may result in my frustration lasting for the rest of the day. And none of these situations, like, the response is neither wrong nor right. It just is what it is. And the difference is that there are different ways of responding to the same exact stimulus, to the same exact situation. And that's informed by our history. It's definitely informed by our trauma history. And, and all of this happens within a split second. We think, we act, we think, we feel, we act. We think about building awareness. Step 2, the thoughts that cause us the greatest suffering in life are either untrue, often, or not entirely accurate. And this often comes into effect when we think, oh, this was all my fault. And if we challenge that thought, well, is it? Is it in fact completely 100% my fault? Or we think, if I go to this place, something bad is going to happen. No. If we start to challenge it and think about it, like if we apply just statistical decision making to it, like, what's the probability of that thing happening? The thing that I automatically think is going to happen, what's the probability of it happening? And when we have these thoughts come to us multiple times a day, and after we experience a trauma, they start to come in. The danger thoughts tend to come in a lot more frequently, a lot more often, and they tend to have a lot more staying power. And they can become automatic over time. Being overwhelmed by these thoughts can also make us feel depression, can make us feel anxiety. And they can make us behave or prompt us to behave in unhelpful ways. And so we have a set of sort of what we call thinking traps or cognitive distortions, ways in which our mind can sort of just use a heuristic to automatically sort of assume that a negative thought is true. But if we're able to label it, we're able to categorize it, we can actually identify some of the ways in which it might be inaccurate or it might not be completely true. And it can help inform us as to how we tend to engage with that thought. Now, there are, depending on which literature you consult, there's between 8 to 12 cognitive distortions or thinking traps. And a quick Google search can really allow you to read through in detail. But I'm gonna hit on a couple of really common ones, like all or nothing thinking. So this is where we see things entirely black or white. A person is either all good or they're all bad. I'm either a good person or a horrible person. I either did a good job or I was horrible at my job. It doesn't give us a space to think about the middle ground, the in-between. Because if my automatic thought is, I'm horrible at my job, how does that make me feel? Maybe demotivated, maybe sad, maybe disengaged. And what does it make me do? Maybe I become just unmotivated over time. But it all stems from the way that we're thinking about it, the belief we have in the first place. So again, a few more cognitive distortions or thinking traps, jumping to conclusions, thinking that we know the thing that's going to happen with absolute certainty. And that can be either mind reading. We think we know what somebody else is thinking, or fortune telling. It's like that we know a bad thing is going to happen. So we start to act even though the thing hasn't happened yet, or may not even happen, but we've already prepared ourselves for it. Catastrophizing, which can be related to jumping to conclusions and fortune telling. You think the absolute worst is going to happen, and magnification, minimization, exaggerating the importance of things like a mistake or like a thing that you feel you did wrong, and ignore some of the successes. You ignore the achievements. And emotional reasoning, that if I feel a certain way about it, it must be true. So if I feel horrible about myself, if I feel like I'm not good at my job, then I must not be good at my job. Or if I feel scared, then that means that something is definitely going to happen. A really big thought distortion, cognitive distortion, thinking trap to focus on are should statements, where you think about all the things you should or could have, the the must and the oughts. These thoughts are actually, they feel like they can be helpful to us at the time, but they actually kind of do a number on us. They say that if we had done a certain thing a certain way, then the outcome would be completely different. And the reality of that is that we can never know the outcome. Even if we had done something differently, it doesn't mean the outcome would have changed. And it's so easy to go in after the fact and think about things from 20, like they say, hindsight's 2020. And so being able to go back is a luxury. What's much harder sometimes for us is to actually think, what was the knowledge we had in that moment? Because when the should or shouldn'ts come in, they don't often allow us to realize the reality of what was occurring, the reality of the information that was known in the moment. Because yes, had we known more, yeah, we probably would have done something different. And at the same time, it doesn't mean anything would be different. Just curious, is the audio still feel patchy for others? So I'm just if we the third step of building awareness, if we find ourselves unable to move forward, it's helpful to review the actual facts, to go back and spend some due diligence. That said, it can be very, very painful, very scary, deeply painful and scary. And we like to put forward these 5 questions that can help us clarify our understanding of what actually happened and start to help us move forward. So 1, could I have acted any differently during the event, considering the particular stage I was at in my career, the information that I had, my access to resources, and my clinical training thus far? If you were able to objectively ask yourself this question, you'd probably realize that you did the best with what you had available, that your intentions were actually good, and intentions matter. Intentions are important. 2, was it only me, or did anything or anyone else contribute to the event? And we kind of mentioned this a little bit before. People that are drowning in guilt and regret usually take 100% and complete responsibility for a situation. They don't often take a moment to take into account outside circumstances, environmental factors, and people that also played a role, and other people that were present that may have influenced one way or another. Was there anything that I did correctly in the situation? Such an important question, because we tend to focus exclusively on the negative aspects of a scenario. And instead, if we try to remember all the aspects that went right and give these equal attention, it might be incredibly helpful for us to find a balanced perspective on what happened. It might help us to get a little bit unstuck, because often thinking in a negative way about what happened can often keep us stuck. It keeps us in that place. It doesn't really allow us the chance to get out. And as a result of this experience, have I changed the way that I respond to and behave in similar situations? This is the importance of sometimes using a mistake, using something that went wrong, to learn from it and to find some purpose that allows you to affect the next animal, to affect the next situation. That even those mistakes, as painful as they are, allow us to continue to become our best selves. And if we think about mistakes from the aspect of, can I learn from this? Can I apply this? It tends to buffer some of the negative feelings that we have around it. And 5, is there anything I can do now that will make a difference about how I think and feel regarding the situation? And while it'd be wonderful if the answer was yes, sometimes it's too late to make a change. So, for example, if a death occurred. And in this case, sometimes the best thing that we can do is start to practice self-forgiveness and finding ways to honor the life that was lost. Sometimes things happen that are outside of our ability to comprehend, outside of our ability to control, and life can be lost. And can we find ways to forgive, to find ways to honor, find ways to find purpose that flows from that? Because it is impossible to change the past. And while examining it can help us, think towards the future, it can help us process what happened. The reality is we still can't change it. And there's so much more we can continue to do to help others, to help other animals, to help our colleagues. So, understandably, many of us, again, try to cope by avoiding situations. And avoidance impedes our healing. Avoidance is actually one of the biggest factors that can keep us stuck. And so being able to move forward, to process the emotions as they happen in their raw and true form, being able to sort of work through some of the natural fear that we have after a trauma happens, can help lead us on, can help to get us on the path to healing, to starting to feel like we've recovered. And a little bit about, just the nefarious nature of self-criticism and how tough it can feel to be stuck or to feel stuck. Trying to imagine what relief would look like from this, like physically, mentally, emotionally, can help us to actually see what our lives can be like and what we'd like them to be like. Again, a couple of coping skills that we have for moving forward is, again, that word again, awareness. Being aware of what's happening for us, our common reactions. When an event happened, how did I react to it? What happened in my body? What were the emotions that I have? What were the thoughts that are coming to me? What are the thoughts that continue to come? How am I making sense of it? What are the things? What are the beliefs of mine that have started to change? What's different about me now than before? And being able to identify those things, pay attention to the images and the scenes that replay what's happening. Often they're so scary that we just want to put them out of our mind. But can we take a moment to see what's actually happening here? What's the thing that's happening inside me? Often, and this is harder than it may seem, being able to conjure some gratitude and finding the things that we're grateful for. Often these situations tend to push us in a direction that feels more negative. And so this can be a counterbalancing strategy to help just even out the thoughts as they come, being able to hold both things in mind, being able to hold the things that we don't like, the things that are painful, along with the things that we're thankful for and the things that give us joy. Writing is so important and helpful. Reading more about it, you can find so many things online about reactions to trauma, how people's stories, how people have processed their trauma. You'll find things about how to identify your own thoughts and emotions. And there's a thing about writing that automatically detaches an emotion. It detaches a thought from us. It gives us the power to really actually observe it. It's such a remarkable thing. And it can allow us to start to make sense of things that have happened too. Another coping strategy for moving forward is being able to just to act. Being able to realize that our fears are just fears, and that it gives us an opportunity to be much stronger from what we've experienced. It's the idea of being able to grow after a traumatic event or post-traumatic growth. Being able to reframe our thoughts. So if the key word for today was awareness, we can also start to reframe that triangle that we looked at, the thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and how they influence each other, how they affect each other. Being able to reframe that thought, reframe that emotion, reframe that behavior, and how it affects that cycle, how it changes things. Asking and leading with curiosity can be incredibly helpful. Be curious about what's happening inside you. Veterinary med professionals are often so skilled at observing what's happening in the situation, observing, diagnosing cases, troubleshooting, figuring out what's going on. And so that skill is there. And I encourage you to start to see if we can turn that skill inward. Can we do the same thing with ourselves that we naturally do in the outside environment? Being authentic to yourself is incredibly important. This is where this can combat the shoulds, the coulds, the musts, the oughts, being able to redirect and say, what is authentic to me and what is the value that is important for me to live by. And another thing is just to speak with those who get it and have been there. The vet med community is such a special community because there are so many shared experiences. There are so many ways in which talking to each other automatically get it, automatically can almost finish the feeling, the thought, the sentence, because you know. And there's a way in which speaking with those who get it can help us not feel so alone. Knowing that somebody else actually feels a similar way that we do can be incredibly helpful to us. It at least gives us a teammate to approach these things with. I thank you all for your time, for your listening, and hopefully that you've been able to come away from this with some language that you can use to make sense of what's happening, what the things that are happening within you, the things that happen in the aftermath for you, because this is a profession that often is highly exposed to traumatic events. And so there's so much risk of things just affecting you in a way. And it's not your fault. It's not anything that you can necessarily choose. We react how we react, and building the awareness, building the understanding can help us to get back on our feet once we've been really knocked down by trauma. And so one of the ways in which we do that is the Veterinary Mental Health Initiative. And so Dr. Katie Lawler just popped up on your screen here. And so please feel free to contact her. Her information is there. And I'll actually turn it over to her right now. I'm so thankful for everybody for your time, for listening. And please feel free to reach out to me for any questions that you have. I'd be more than happy to answer. This is what I do for a living. So thank you.
Thank you, Dustin, and thank you to all of our live attendees. And for those of you who will be viewing the recording, we hope you learned a lot about trauma from Dustin Kieschnick. These webinars are designed to build upon one another, and we'd love to have everyone who can join us for the next webinars in this series, including the overlap of personal and professional trauma in veterinary medicine by Dr. Taylor Miller, and Trauma-Informed Care in Vet Med by Angie Aurora. So thank you, everyone. We'll take questions now, and I believe we will also, if anyone has questions later, please reach out to us and we'll have resources available. I'm not seeing any questions come in. So perhaps if you do, what does the VMHI do for trauma? So maybe I'll just take a moment and explain the services that we offer. So the VMHI offers 6-week support groups. We have 2 groups, one for veterinarians and one for all vet med professionals. And frequently traumatic cases will come up. We provide handouts that are based on different therapeutic modalities. We process cases together. The groups are designed to be a very small, warm, welcoming environment. We cap them at 12 to ensure that those who do want to speak have a rich opportunity to do so, but it's also a great number. Or if you're more of an introvert like myself, you can just attend. And then we do have a specialized 6-week group solely for traumatic cases. And then we also offer individual sessions, 6 to 8 per calendar year for veterinarians. These are not designed to be counseling or therapy, but often are a first step into mental health care, especially within the context of vet med. And then I'm saying, can Dustin share more about his specific series and the next opportunity to sign up? Dustin, I'll let you do that. And I'll just say that we do have a group starting tomorrow for veterinarians. This will be facilitated by Dr. Nancy Bloom, who's a clinician at Harvard, and it's specifically on building resiliency skills and communication with clients. But Dustin, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you see in your 6-week trauma group.
Yeah, what we often see are folks that have been isolated or thinking that they're the only one that experiences a thing. And it's so palpable, the feeling of relief that folks have. Our trauma specific series in particular just focuses on the traumatic parts of veterinary medicine, knowing that we often also bring in our own personal histories to what we do, and everything that we do. We don't our histories don't just necessarily drop away at the door. And so we have ways of responding, and we have coping strategies that we've adapted that are either helpful and sometimes in some cases not quite so helpful, that we start to also identify and see if we can replace some of those coping strategies that are not quite as helpful with those that can be that can better serve us. So that's and the next opportunity to sign up, we're still figuring out what scheduling looks like, but we will definitely sort of put out through the distribution channels as soon as we've locked down a time, a day that we're going to start.
Well, your group just ended about 2 weeks ago. So we always have another group upcoming. Our All Vet Med Professionals group will start up again after the 4th of July holiday. And the newest thing we just added as of today, we're going to bring back our mindfulness group, which is open to absolutely everyone, including vet med students. That'll be Fridays for half an hour with Dr. Amanda Weiss. It was very well attended last year, and will be back by popular demand.
We also had a question in the Q&A about touching on the somatic impacts of primary and secondary trauma. And I think that's such a great question, and thank you for posing it. I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I think it goes so much to the body remembers. And there's a really great book if folks are interested, called The Body Keeps the Score, that talks about some of the somatic reactions that we have that we can have to trauma, because we feel it. And I think sometimes the difficulty with sort of understanding somatic responses is that it doesn't always seem like a logical linkage. Right? I feel a thing, then it doesn't necessarily relate always to what I've experienced. Sometimes it does, and at the same time, it's part of building that awareness. And thank you for bringing the question, because yes, we do tend to focus a lot on the emotion aspects and the cognitive aspects, and some of the biological aspects, and the somatic aspects are just as important. The things that happen in our body that we feel in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath, and the days, weeks, and months afterward are so important to start connecting pieces and start to pay attention to, and start to really help us again on that path to recovery.
Any final questions? And again, I believe Bree put my email. I do all the correspondence for the VMH. I'm the only one who has access to our email. So if you'd like to reach out to us, if you have interest, or if you have questions or want more information about our groups, please do not hesitate to reach out. And I think on behalf of Dustin and myself, we're just incredibly honored to have been here today with you.
Very
So
much.
thank you so much.